and then I made my decision. I would not trust the computer. I picked up the telephone handset, spoke to my superiors, and reported that the alarm was false.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 times in history when one person was responsible, either directly or indirectly, for saving millions of other lives.
The Americans, the Russians, the French, the Germans, everyone thinks Enigma is unbreakable.
Good. Let me try, and we'll know for sure, won't we?
Number 10, the creation of the Heimlich Maneuver, Henry Heimlich.
Can you quickly tell us how you came up with this maneuver to save someone from choking?
The frightening truth is that there are countless ways that a person could suddenly die within seconds. But we have the American surgeon Dr. Henry Heimlich to thank for providing a universally used solution for one of them, choking. The Heimlich Maneuver is a first aid technique used to save choking victims. Developed in the 1970s by Dr. Heimlich, it works by applying pressure to the diaphragm, which then dislodges food or other objects that are blocking a person's airway.
So the simple solution was, how do you always drive the object away from the lung and toward the mouth? And as a chest surgeon, I knew if you pushed up on the diaphragm and compressed the lungs, it would act like a bellows and blow the object out.
Today, it is a fundamental and essential skill taught in CPR courses, and it's a technique that everyone is recommended to know. Ultimately, it's impossible to place a number on how many lives the Heimlich Maneuver has saved in the 50-plus years it's been in use, but it can be applied at any moment and all around the world to prevent disaster.
Grasp that fist with your other hand and pull back and up quickly until the object is expelled or the person loses consciousness and needs to be lowered to the ground to begin CPR.
Number 9, the Petite Curies in World War I, Marie Curie.
To help the war effort, Marie taught herself to drive and took the so-called Petite Curies to wherever they were needed, where she'd unload the equipment, hook up the generator, and activate the X-ray machine with little or no protection from the rays for herself.
At the outbreak of World War I in 1914, Marie Curie was already a world-renowned trailblazer of science. Her work on radioactivity led to the first of 2 Nobel Prizes in 1903, with the second coming in 1911 for her discovery of polonium and radium. But even after all of that, she by no means rested.
Fearful of a German invasion of Paris, many fled the capital. Marie, however, stayed.
During the war, Curie set up a fleet of mobile X-ray units. They became known as Petite Curies, and they were continuously sent into the heart of the battle, wherever wounded soldiers needed aid. Curie recruited her own daughter to help with the effort, and is said to have hurriedly learned how to drive a car purely so that she could help with the war effort. Again, we simply cannot calculate precisely how many lives were saved thanks to Curie's efforts, but her mobile units were vital to those on the front.
Years later, Curie contracted a fatal blood disease, caused in part by exposure to radiation during her service. But her work lives on, sparking innovation in science, education, and medicine to this day.
Number 8, the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug.
Dr. Norman Borlaug, an Iowa-born crop expert, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize yesterday for his work toward easing the world's hunger problem.
Known as the father of the Green Revolution, Norman Borlaug was an agronomist, an expert in soil and crops, whose large-scale work on improving yields totally transformed agriculture in the 20th century. His most famous and impactful contributions were in the growing of wheat. Starting in Mexico in the mid-1940s, Borlaug worked both in a team and individually to develop variously hardy and high-yield varieties of the staple crop, at a time when Mexico had been notably struggling to produce enough for demand.
He partnered with the Rockefeller Foundation and was transferred to the International Center for Maize and Wheat Improvement, or CIMMYT, to use the Spanish acronym.
After more than a decade working on the venture, Borlaug then took his findings worldwide, and especially into South Asia. There, his supercrop sparked another sea change in the farming industry, again dramatically improving the yield. There's no telling just how important Borlaug's work was, but some calculate that it could be responsible for saving not just millions, but billions of people worldwide.
It's really impossible to understand the massive growth of the human population, to understand the urbanization of our species, to understand our tremendous increasing ecological impact on the world. unless we understand Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution.
Number 7. The development of the polio vaccine. Jonas Salk.
The genesis of modern-day vaccines began in 1796, when an English doctor took on smallpox.
In history, there have been many crucial developments of vital vaccines. It was Britain's Edward Jenner who created the world's first of any type for smallpox in 1796. Meanwhile, and in modern times, there was the American microbiologist Maurice Hilleman who delivered more than 40 vaccines, including one of the most widely administered for MMR. Jonas Salk was another hugely influential figure in the mid-20th century, though. An American virologist, he developed one of history's most important medicines, the polio vaccine.
Since the turn of the 20th century, polio, also known as infantile paralysis, had become an increasingly menacing fact of American life.
Before Salk, polio had been a devastating disease that caused paralysis and death, and primarily affected children. Salk reportedly worked flat out for years to develop a treatment, however, and in 1955, the polio shot was released. Within 25 years, the disease had been eliminated from America. Today, the miracle jab has ridden almost all of the rest of the world of it as well.
It became more and more evident that we were really in trouble. And without knowing what to do, or how to stop it, or how to get away from it, we were just stuck with it.
Number 6. Cracking the Enigma Code. Alan Turing.
I'm designing a machine that will allow us to break every message, every day, instantly.
In times of war, there are some who truly step up. Alan Turing was a mathematician and computer scientist, but he also goes down as one of the most important figures of World War II thanks to his code-breaking work against Nazi Germany. At Britain's Bletchley Park, Turing led a team that successfully cracked Germany's infamous Enigma code. In short, Turing's genius meant that the Allied forces were able to intercept and understand thousands of German messages every single day during the height of the conflict.
The standard Enigma machine had over 150 million possible daily settings.
There is no one exact moment when Enigma was broken, but Turing led a series of urgent breakthroughs that ultimately enabled Britain to monitor communications that had once been indecipherable. It was a crucial win for Allied intelligence and is said to have significantly shortened the duration of the war, thereby again potentially saving untold millions of lives.
Stalingrad, the Ardennes, the invasion of Normandy. All victories that would not have been possible without the intelligence that we supplied.
Number 5. The discovery of artemisinin, 2-yo-yo.
The malaria parasite and the mosquito that transmits it have probably affected human history more than any other creatures we share the planet with.
Malaria is easily one of the most damaging and deadly diseases in human history. Estimates vary, but at their highest, it's predicted that it may even have been responsible for up to half of all human deaths ever. Therefore, anyone who contributes to the fight against it has the potential to save a lot of people. It was the Chinese pharmaceutical chemist 2-yo-yo who perhaps made the greatest breakthrough of all, though. In the late 1960s, she worked as a lead scientist on Project 523, a Chinese effort to develop anti-malarial drugs in response to rising malaria deaths in the Vietnam War. 2-yo-yo, whose research primarily drew upon traditional Chinese medicine, soon discovered artemisinin in 1972, a drug group that's now used worldwide as a first-line treatment for malaria. Her findings were initially published anonymously, but in 2015, she got the credit she deserved when she won the Nobel Prize, then aged 84. Number 4. The discovery of penicillin. Alexander Fleming.
A captain in the Army Medical Corps during World War I, Fleming had watched many of his fellow soldiers die, not from wounds they suffered in battle, but from infections that came after. And it was these needless deaths that spurred his research.
Some people work for years specifically to change the world. Others manage to do it by accident. The latter happened to Alexander Fleming, a Scottish biologist who, in 1928, by chance discovered penicillin, the world's first antibiotic, while studying bacteria growth at St. Mary's Hospital in London. So the story goes, Fleming had accidentally left the lid off a petri dish before going on holiday. And when he returned, he discovered that that dish was now hosting a new kind of mold, penicillin, which had killed the bacteria that should have been there.
When he returned to the dish, a mold had started growing, killing the pesky bacteria. He called this mold penicillin. Aha!
His observation that the mold inhibited bacterial growth led to the development of antibiotics and to one of the most profound and seismic revolutions in medical history. Countless infections that were once life-threatening now weren't. Untold lives that may have once been lost could now be saved.
It would take further experimentation for him to discover that it was a juice the mold produced that killed a host of bacteria, a juice he would name penicillin.
Number 3. Stopping nuclear war. Stanislav Petrov.
It was completely unexpected, as such things usually are. The siren sounded very loudly, and I just sat there for a few seconds, staring at the screen with the word "launch" displayed in bold red letters.
In 1983, Stanislav Petrov was a Soviet lieutenant colonel operating amidst the Cold War. On September 26th of that year, he also saved the world. On that day, Petrov correctly identified incoming nuclear missile alerts as being false alarms. To all appearances, the data said that a multi-missile attack had been launched against the Soviet Union by the United States, a move that should have resulted in a Soviet counter and nuclear war within minutes. Rather than immediately launching retaliatory strikes, however, Petrov's calm judgment and instinct urged him to think twice.
Товарищ полковник, докладывает Петров.
Доложите статус.
Я выдаю вам ложную информацию.
Вы что, заявляете, что это ложная тревога?
Так точно. Тревога ложная.
And he was right to hesitate. The US hadn't launched an attack, the USSR was not under threat, and nuclear war didn't need to begin. Nevertheless, it very nearly did begin, were it not for Petrov, whose actions effectively saved the millions of lives that would have been lost.
I knew perfectly well that nobody would be able to correct my mistake if I had made one.
Честно говоря, 50-50.
Number 2. Solving the Cuban Missile Crisis. Vasily Arkhipov.
At its beginning, this day looked as though it might be one of armed conflict between Soviet vessels and American warships on the sea lanes leading to Cuba. But there has been no confrontation as far as we know, and some hope has been generated by suggestions of negotiation.
21 years prior to when Stanislav Petrov averted nuclear disaster, something similar had played out in the waters around Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 goes down as arguably the closest humankind has ever come to nuclear war.
The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
However, when the infamous standoff was at its most tense, the actions of one Soviet naval officer may have single-handedly prevented the worst from happening. Vasily Arkhipov was serving aboard the B-59 submarine at the time, where he was one of 3 high-ranking officials who had to all agree in order for a nuclear weapon to be launched. When, among all the geopolitical turmoil of the time, the other 2 officials voted yes to launch an attack against the US, Arkhipov was the only dissenting voice. As such, nothing was launched, their submarine surfaced, and the watching world avoided a nuclear catastrophe. Although, it wasn't until years later that just how close we came was fully revealed.
I think it is perhaps a mistake to think of this as a crisis. This is not a simple world we live in any longer. When you have a world polarized into 2 camps, they do not work on simply one front.
Before we unveil our top pick, here are some honorable mentions. Karl Landsteiner. He was the first to identify and classify blood into the groups A, B, and O, which quickly led to the first successful blood transfusions in the early 1900s.
Today, around 107 million units of blood donations are collected globally every year, demonstrating the huge impact of Landsteiner's discovery.
James Harrison. Known as the man with the golden arm, Harrison gave 1,173 blood plasma donations over more than 60 years, and his rare blood type has saved millions of babies. Gertrude Elion. Her breakthrough research led to the creation of azidothymidine, or AZT, the first widely used drug against HIV/AIDS.
Recipient of numerous awards, including the Nobel Prize for Medicine, in recognition of her work, which helped create drug treatments for leukemia, malaria, and AIDS.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. The HeLa cells, Henrietta Lacks.
Our family, she was a matriarch, of course. She was a loving, nurturing, caring person.
She was a mother, taking care of her children.
Henrietta Lacks was a 31-year-old African-American woman who, in 1951, found out that she was seriously ill with cervical cancer. She underwent treatment at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Maryland in the U.S. There, following a biopsy, her cells were taken without her consent or knowledge for medical research. This was common practice at the time, but the treatment of Lacks's particular cells would go down in history. They were found to be extremely durable. For whatever reason, they could be kept alive while other human cells couldn't be, so much so that the cell line is still alive today.
It was really, in my opinion, the launch pad, probably the greatest discovery in biomedical research in the last half of the 20th century. It has led to numerous discoveries.
Known as HeLa cells, they've become one of the most important tools in modern medicine, used extensively in experiments and for scientific discoveries, including for developing vaccines and studying cancer treatments. The circumstances under which her cells were taken means that her story is also one of controversy, especially as Lacks unfortunately died after just a few months of treatment in October 1951. But her unwitting contribution to medicine has had and still has an immeasurable impact, saving countless millions of lives.
We all feel like we're connected to this beautiful woman who we call the mother of medicine. It really makes you think about how powerful an impact one person unknowingly could make.
Which of these incredible people do you find most inspiring? Let us know in the comments.
If X-rays killed Marie, then she was a different kind of martyr. Her life ended prematurely, like so many others, as the result of her efforts in the Great War.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.